Alright, so in this video we are going to run through all of the settings on this side, which is the config part of the balance app. Now, before we get started, you're going to notice a lot of these settings are safety related, and that's really important. I would recommend having every single safety enabled at the start, especially when it's on a bench. And then over time, as you trust your vehicle more and more and it's really dialed in, you can maybe roll some of those back. But it's important to remember that it's not just safety of you falling, which you should wear a helmet. It's also safety of your vehicle running away and causing damage or hurting somebody else. So you want to make sure that if it's going to run away, you should have at least two ways that it'll shut itself off, maybe even more. So with that said, just run through every single setting. I'll briefly explain it and I will say what I would set it to and why. So this first section is startup. This is going to be, so basically the balance app, sometimes it's active and sometimes it's not. It's not always spinning the motor and trying to balance. And you can see at the bottom in your state, if it's active, it'll be running. And if it's not, it'll be at fault or dead or calibrating on an initial boot up. Now, these angle tolerances are going to be at what angle it's allowed to start. So if it's not running, and in this case this is set to 20, if it's less than 20 degrees from center, it'll then trigger a start mode. If it pitch axis is less than 20 degrees from center, the same thing for the roll axis. Now, for a unicycle shaped vehicle, it's pretty common of them when you get anywhere near center, it'll just kick on and then it'll slowly rotate itself up to center. Or not slowly, pretty quickly. It'll just go and then it'll be on and then you can step on it and ride away. So for a unicycle shaped vehicle, I would put a large value here, like 20, 25, maybe even 30 degrees. For the roll angle, it's the same, whatever you want, 5 degrees, 10 degrees, it's all pretty okay. And the centering speed would be pretty quick because as soon as it locks in, you just want it to go, you don't want to sit there waiting for like, if it was 5 degrees per second and you had 20 degrees, you'd have to wait 4 seconds for it to slowly tilt to center, and you don't want to do that. Now, if you're using a skateboard shaped vehicle, typically on those, they're off. You step on it and then you jump to center and then it activates. So for those, you would want your pitch angle tolerance to be really small, like even half a degree, maybe even less. And then right when it's at center, then it'll kick on. And then your startup centering speed, you don't want 30 degrees per second jump. You probably want something pretty low, like 1 or 2 degrees per second, so it'll slowly make that final little adjustment to get it where you want. Now this last one is brake current, and what that will do is it'll hold the motor in place when you're not riding. So if you put like 10 amps or 20 amps or whatever, it does it smartly. It's using I think it's using the iBrake, not the HB or the Anchor or whatever. And so it doesn't really draw much current when you're not using it, but it's really helpful, especially on a skateboard vehicle. If you're on a downhill and you're trying to hop to center and the wheel's just free spinning as soon as you lift up, it's really challenging. So this adds some amount of resistance. It's not super strong, even if you set a high value. I have noticed with HFI, higher values can actually get stronger than lower values, but with Hall sensors, it all seems to feel the same to me. But that's just my own experience. Now the next section is tilt back. Now tilt back is the only way that the app will let you know that you should stop doing whatever it is you're doing. So tilt back angle 15 degrees, that's on a unicycle. Your feet would just come back. On a skateboard, I'd put it lower, 5 degrees, maybe 8 degrees, that's more reasonable. The tilt back speed, again, 5 degrees per second is on the quicker side, 2 degrees, that's, also reasonable. Now, that's, how quick it'll tilt back. Now, duty cycle tilt back is a tilt back that will happen when you go above a certain duty cycle, and you want to give yourself a good amount of headroom. Now, duty cycle raises based on both torque or amps and RPM. So if you get near the top speed, your duty cycle will go up even if you're not trying to go out of current. And even if you're at a low speed and you use a lot of current, like on a steep hill, you'll get tilt back as well. So this one is kind of useful for both of them. and it's at least a way of having less settings for now. But when you hit the 75% duty cycle tilt back, the tilt back means the wheel needs to spin ahead and actually lift the front of you up. And so that causes it to use even more duty cycle. So as soon as you hit the 75 and it starts doing tilt back, you might see your duty cycle, spike up to 80, maybe even 85. And at 95, that's the maximum power you have. So you really don't want to put this too high. If you put it at 90%, you're basically going to hit it and instantly fall. On a unicycle, being really careful with riding, I found I was able to have it at 85%, but that is I think it would be really careless to put it above there unless you just don't want it at all. Um, 70 is probably like a good default. If you've got a vehicle that has more speed than you're worried about, even 60 is, really nice. You got a good range of safety. Now, their high voltage tilt back is going to happen when you batteries over a certain voltage. You will get tilt back basically as soon as you start moving. I think it's like duty cycle over 1% or something. Um, so for that, you would set it to basically fully charged, but like 1 volt extra or something, and then you'd only really hit it if you're on a fresh charge and then go downhill. If you set it to exactly your fully charged battery, you might find that your charger is over by 0.1 of a volt, and then every time you try to brake, you hit it or something like that. Um, so yeah, give yourself like just a little bit of headroom. It's up to you to manage your own battery that way. And then low voltage tilt back is going to be the same thing. Whenever you get below a certain voltage, it's going to tilt you back. Now, for this one, I would actually set it lower than you would think. You might think, all right, I want to stop riding at 3.5 volts per cell. The problem with that is like when you're at 3.7 or 3.8 volts per cell, as soon as you like ride and then go over a bump or a hill, you're gonna have some sag and you're gonna hit this pretty easily. So if you want to stop riding at 3.5 volts per cell, you probably want to set this a little bit lower, like 3.3 volts per cell or something like that. But you can do your own experimentation. Now, another thing that's important to know is that related to this setting is the motor voltage settings. And you want to set, or I recommend setting both of these to 0. Because what this is going to do is it's just going to sap all of your power when you get to low voltage, and you don't want that in a balancing vehicle. Like your power is keeping you from falling on your face. So leave those at 0 and then have this be your way of knowing that your battery's getting too low. And it won't really throttle your power. I mean, to some degree it will throttle your power because your duty cycle of 0.75 is going to happen earlier when your battery is lower because it'll happen at slower speeds because you have less voltage. Um, but that's what your voltage tiltbacks are, and that's personal preference based on your battery and how you want to treat it. Now, constant tiltback is going to be as soon as you start riding, it's just going to give you tiltback, and this is something that you would set to maybe 1 degree or 2 degrees if you just like riding with a little bit of nose up. You might like riding even with a little bit of nose down. You could set it to -1 degree or something like that. It's just a personal preference kind of thing. Now, next we're going to get into overspeed. Now, this one is the one that causes all of the trouble for beginners. What this will do is when your wheel spins over a certain duty cycle, it'll shut it off, and it'll shut it off permanently so that you need a reboot to reset it. And this is really helpful to prevent a runaway wheel, and it's a really good safety mechanism, especially when you're on a bench and you're testing and your motor spins up, it jumps, it grabs something and it goes flying across the room. This will shut it off pretty quickly. The problem that happens is almost everybody puts their vehicle on a bench, holds their IMU in their hand, and when you do that and you move the IMU, the PID is not receiving any feedback from its actions. It's just saying, okay, I moved and the angle didn't change, so let me move even more, and it'll almost instantly go up to maximum duty cycle and shut off right away. So if you're testing on a bench, like I don't recommend turning this off, but then again, you're gonna have a really hard time testing if you don't turn it off. You can put your p-value really low so that you can move your gyro in your hand enough without it getting to full speed. You could also adjust your max and min current scale potentially. That could be another way of slowing down your vehicle enough that you won't hit your duty cycle cutoff when testing on a bench, but you can still make sure that your IMU maps. Most people just end up shutting this off, and hopefully they don't get their finger stuck or it doesn't go flying across the room. The overspeed delay is just a timeout of how long it waits before it happens. A word of caution, this delay and this fault delay, they work for me. They definitely work for other people, but it also seems there are some people who are having trouble with it working for them. So I would definitely test your setup and test it again before you rely on these delays. If you leave him at 0, I have not heard of anybody having problems. That's really weird and sketchy, and I'm sorry. And hopefully we'll get to the bottom of it in the future. Now, the next thing are going to be your faults. Now, these are like a shutoff, but it's not permanent. It doesn't require a reboot. It just means you're not actively riding the vehicle. It's not actively balancing. Pitch axis cutoff means if you lean too far on the way you're balancing. Roll axis is the other way your vehicle falls over on the side. 45 degree is a pretty common normal value that everybody would use for the roll axis. Any vehicle that falls over is probably going to fall over 45 degrees. It's a good safety. The pitch axis, this can really vary what I would recommend because there's switches and stuff. So if you don't have switches, which we'll talk about later, you can use this on a skateboard style so that when your nose hits the floor, it shuts off. And that's a really good safety that will likely prevent your vehicle from running away. If you've got switches, you may want to set that a little bit higher, and then it won't, it won't shut off when you're going up a steep hill or doing something weird, Well, on a steep hill, it's still going to stay flat, but if you're, I don't know, whatever the weird situation is that you get it at a steep angle, or if you're just scraping your nose, doing a fang drag, something like that. So yeah, you can set that to whatever you want. For a unicycle, 20 degrees, you never really go over that. Once you go over 20 degrees, you're falling because unicycles are tuned really stiff. So the next are the switches, and I'm going to do a whole video on switches, but basically they would be some sort of sensor that you stand on, and if you're on it, it knows you're on the vehicle, and that would be a way of when you jump off, it'll automatically shut off because it doesn't detect that you're standing on it. And again, that will have its own video, but if you've got that safety, you're not as worried about it running away. But your vehicle could still get stuck with the switch on. Maybe you made the switch and it worked, but then after 2 weeks of standing on it all day, it kind of got stuck in the on position. So it's still good to have your duty cycle cut off and your pitch axis cut off and hope that it gets up to max speed and shuts off, or hits a curb and rolls over and shuts itself off, rather than just bouncing around and running like crazy, because I've seen stuff like that happen. This ERPM is related to switches. We'll cover that in the other video. And then the fault delay is how long to wait before the fault cuts in. So that is all of the configuration settings for the Balance app. Hope that helped. And as always, you can click the little question marks and it'll talk about those a little bit more.